Hello, beautiful soul, and welcome to a new episode of the Holistic Life Podcast. I'm the host, Georgiana Denetz, and I have the pleasure and the honor to interview today Jerry Marzinski, who is a retired licensed psychotherapist with over 40 years of experience working with and studying the thought processes of psychotic and criminally insane patients in some of the most volatile psychiatric institutions in the States. It was there that he first noticed blatant contradictions between what has been thought about schizophrenia by the ivory tower and what he was witnessing and learning from schizophrenic patients. And he made also a groundbreaking discovery described in his book, An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower. And I also have the pleasure to introduce Anon, who fought the voices as a young man, spent a month locked in a psych ward, had several mystical experiences, and won a horrific battle with the voices. He is now married with kids and working as a mechanical engineer. So welcome, Jerry and Anon. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to talk with you and share with our listeners these stories because I believe they're very important. They offer some practical keys how to take care of our mental sanity. And there are many people, I believe, who will have a lot of help from listening to you this evening. So, Jerry, you are very welcome to start.
Yeah, I wanted to bring Anon on because, just listening to me alone, even though I've seen hundreds of schizophrenics who are hearing voices, it's a lot better to hear a firsthand report. And the firsthand reports of people who've conquered the voices fly in the face of what the psychiatric mafia is saying is that this condition is hopeless. It's a lifelong situation, that you got to take their toxic drugs for the rest of your life, and that there's no hope. It's far from that. What they're doing is barking up the wrong tree. The voices are not any physical thing. They're not a chemical imbalance. This was made up by Eli Lilly back in the 70s when they came out with Prozac. It was a complete lie, and they went with it. So they're looking for something. They don't know what causes schizophrenia, but they need to look like they know what causes it. So they started out blaming mothers, and mothers went, wait a minute, we didn't do anything. What did we do? So they kicked it up to genetics, and they go, oh well, it's a genetic disorder, and they got away with that for over a decade probably. And then some geneticists jumped in there and said, listen, we don't see any genetic markers for schizophrenia. They're not there. And so the psychiatric mafia and big pharma went, well, it's not just one gene, it's a bunch of genes. They're all mixed together. So we're sure it's the genetics, but we don't know what it is yet, but we'll find it eventually. They didn't find anything. The genetic thing was disproven. So then they had to kick it up somewhere else where the general public and the mass of professionals could not view what was going on. So Eli Lilly in the 70s, when they came out with Prozac, they said, well, our antidepressants are chemical, and they have some kind of chemical effect on the brain, and they do something. So it must be a chemical imbalance. Complete lie, no evidence for that at all, but they ran with it. And big pharma like that, psychiatric mafia like that, they started teaching it in the big pharma controlled institutions, and they're still doing it to this day, even though it's been disproven over and over and over again. And most recently, there's more articles coming out that there is no chemical imbalance with regard to depression or schizophrenia, but they're making $14.7 billion, not million, $1 billion selling these antidepressants and these antipsychotic drugs, which are toxic. Okay, They operate.
That's a very good business.
They've a very good business, and they don't want a cure. They don't make any money from a cure. Neither these antidepressants or these antipsychotic drugs cure anything. They just suppress symptoms. They don't cure, they don't fix anything. And that's a perfect drug for them. Something they can sell that takes care of the symptoms but doesn't cure anything. So these voices that schizophrenics hear are energetic entities. They have reason, they are negative, they run consistent, irreversible patterns. And if they're running patterns, then they're not hallucinations, as the psychiatric mafia and big pharma want you to believe. So, the first pattern I discovered was that they were negative. When I was working at a huge psychiatric hospital in Georgia, the voices were consistently negative. They were insulting, derogatory, abusive, and destructive consistently. So my first question was, if they're running consistent patterns and it's negative, what's holding them to those patterns? How come they aren't random like real hallucinations? What holds them to that negative pattern? Okay. Second pattern I saw while working at the big psychiatric hospital was the voices were anti-religious. They hated the 23rd Psalm. They hated the patient reading the Bible. They hated them going to church, and they kicked up and they got louder whenever the schizophrenic patient did that.
But a hallucination will never be anti anything.
That's right. Why would a hallucination care about the person going to church? But this was consistent. It was almost 100% consistent.
And coincidentally enough, my condition kind of started when I started reading the Bible very intensely for the first time. That's when things started happening. So Jerry's right on track there with the fact that these voices and very strong negative thoughts tend to be very anti-religious. And again, why would a hallucination be anti-religious?
Exactly.
Yeah, I had one patient come up to me and said, I was repeating the 23rd Psalm and the voices reacted like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. So, I thought that was interesting. So I started passing that out to other people that were hearing voices. And there was a negative reaction to all the voices when that person read the 23rd Psalm. So they don't like them going to church. They don't like them reading the Bible. They don't like the Psalms. They don't like preachers. They don't want anything to do with God or Jesus. And why would a hallucination do that? Okay. So the third major one I discovered was that they foster and create negative emotion. So you wonder, why are they consistently negative? They create that negative emotional state, and then they drain their victim. Okay? So they're feeding off of this negative emotion. That's their food. That's why they're consistently negative, abusive, insulting, derogatory, and destructive. They are energetic parasites. Okay? And they hit us all. It's not just schizophrenics. They hit us all. When you have an intrusive and a nasty, negative, intrusive thought, you go, where did that come from? It wasn't yours. You know it wasn't yours. It doesn't belong to you. It's nasty. You would never follow through with it. You would never do anything like that thought suggested. But where does it come from?
But
So
only this, Jay, excuse me that I interrupted, only this insight, and it's absolutely revolutionary, because if people will realize that when they have nasty, negative, destructive thoughts, they are not theirs, they will free themselves from them. But if they believe that they are theirs, they start thinking, oh, I'm a bad person, I'm a negative person, look what thoughts I have. So it will be really a liberating insight to realize that these are not mine. These are some parasites who want to eat my energy. You will do something about it because it's not you, it's not yours.
that's right, exactly right. Now, psychology and psychiatry don't ever ask the question, where do thoughts come from? They completely ignore it. They go,
But
oh, they come from.
It's the cause of it.
Yeah, the thoughts are the cause of it, and they completely ignore it. Nobody's ever found a thought in anybody's brain. They've never done an autopsy and found a thought. So what's really happening is your brain's like a radio receiver. It's tuned to a certain frequency based on how you grew up. If you were abused, sexually molested, physically, emotionally abused, your frequency is very low. and you will attract low frequency entities. Okay, so what happens with schizophrenics? Virtually all of them have suffered some kind of major trauma that kicks that off. I don't even remember any schizophrenic I've talked to that was, feeling really good and everything was going well in their lives and they had a good spiritual basis, and all of a sudden the voices attacked them. So the voices are like sharks swimming in the ocean smelling blood. They hit us all. Emanuel Swedenborg, a Christian mystic that lived some 300 years ago, he said that none of your thoughts are yours. They either come in from heaven or they come in from hell. You are the chooser as to which ones you want to invest your energy in. And where you put your attention is where your energy goes. So if you pay attention to the negative thoughts, you're actually feeding those negative thoughts. If you pay attention to the good thoughts, you're feeding those thoughts. It's like the Native American said, you have a wolf on each shoulder. Whichever one you feed is the one that grows the strongest. So the psychiatric mafia and big pharma are making a ton of money, billions of dollars selling these antipsychotic and antidepressant drugs. And these antipsychotic drugs are toxic. What they found was when they started doing autopsies on these patients that were in psychiatric hospitals for long periods of time taking these antipsychotic drugs, that their brains were shrunken like walnuts. Their peripheral nervous system was shot. So when they came up with that information, the big pharma went nuts and went, no, it's not our drugs. It's the schizophrenia doing this. I mean, yeah, it's schizophrenia is a disease and it's doing that. And they tried to get that pushed through, that schizophrenia was a disease. But the rest of the medical establishment said, no, it's not. It doesn't conform in any way to our definition of a disease. So the psychiatric mafia failed there. So now they call them disorders instead of diseases. And they make them up. Every single psychiatric disorder in this DSM is completely made up. There is not one objective test to verify even one of those, 297 diagnoses right now. So it started out with like 158 back in the 50s. And every year they make up new psychiatric disorders.
But if they say that it's a chemical imbalance in the brain, then in my world and with my logic, it means that you have a human being who is the model that is in perfect psychic health and also perfect chemical balance in the brain, so you can compare. Did they find any chemical imbalances in the brain compared with the perfect human being with a perfect chemical balance in the brain?
No, they didn't. They don't even know what the chemical balance of the brain should be.
You have no baseline.
No baseline. And Anon can talk about that too. I saw that when I was working at the psychiatric hospital, the big one. The psychiatrists would bring in a new patient. They'd talk to them. There was never any kind of test, no lab work, no objective test, no EKG, EEG, no kind of test to determine what the chemical balance of their brain was. They never gave one.
But they said that the person has a chemical imbalance, though they never did any test.
When I was in the psychiatric hospital for those 4 weeks, I got the same comments from the doctors on staff saying, oh, you have a chemical imbalance. And I said, well, what should be the normal baseline of that, the brain chemistry? They just gave me blank stares. They couldn't answer the question. So if you get blood work done, there's always usually kind of a baseline, what's the correct range where certain aspects of your blood should be in terms of, cell counts, different chromiums, different chemicals. The same should be for your brain chemistry, if that is truly the case, or your brain chemistry is off. It's not. The doctors say that because that's what the pharmaceutical industry tells them to promote these drugs that are really just tranquilizers. They don't help the patient resolve or get better. They just mask the symptoms, and the patient can still be hearing these voices on the inside, but they just can't interact with the outside world in the same manner. I mean, some of these drugs for the short term, yes, they are useful, but the pharmaceutical industry is trying to push them for the long term because it generates a lot of sales for them.
I have a question, also a logical question from my point of view. If you have a medicine who says it will cure the disease, is there any patient who got cured by taking these medicines? Because either if you cure it, you take away the cause. If you don't, you just alleviate the symptoms. The cause is still there.
The only time I've seen something like that was when a person first started hearing the voices, and this is very rare, and they gave them those medicines and the voices couldn't get a grip. They couldn't get going. So it was a patient that just started hearing the voices. But once they get in there and they dig in, those drugs don't do anything. They don't cure anything. Right? They just tamp down symptoms. Okay? So like Anon said, that's one of the things I noticed too. Is like the psychiatrist, time after time when I was in the psychiatrist's office with one of my patients, they never gave them any kind of test. It was like a dartboard. They go, okay, we'll start with this drug, and then see how that works. If that doesn't work, we'll increase the dosage. If that doesn't work, we'll change it to another drug. If that doesn't work, we'll add another drug. If that doesn't work, we'll increase this or decrease that. It's just a guessing game. It's a
You're
subjective.
a guinea pig. You're a guinea
You're a
pig as a
guinea pig.
patient.
Yeah, it sounds like that.
Yeah. So there is no science behind any of that other than these drugs work as tranquilizers. So what they're doing is since these entities, these voices are energetic entities, if you look at a magnet, let's say a big, strong magnet, you can't see that magnetic field, you can't hear it, you can't sense it, you can't taste it, you can't touch it. For all practical purposes, as far as we know, it's not there. So if you get a bottle of iron filings and you put it on that magnetic field, then that magnet, you can see that magnetic field. Okay? These patterns that we've discovered, and there's 23 of them now. You can go to my website at jerrymarzinski.com under articles. They're all there. As far as a operational definition of what these voices are, that's what these patterns are. Okay? That's what the voices are. They're negative, they're anti-religious, they foster and create negative emotion, they're parasitic, they energetically drain their victims, and it just goes on and on and on and on. We have 23 of them now. And anybody who doubts it and works with schizophrenics, they can go to the patterns list on my website, and they can see those patterns for themselves. It's not hidden in some genetic stuff or some biological imbalance. It'll be right there before your eyes. All you got to do is look, you'll see it. These things are running patterns, and if they're running patterns, they cannot be hallucinations like the psychiatric mafia and big pharma insist. So,
and if they are genetics, I have also one question. If the schizophrenic, the psychiatric world said that schizophrenia is also genetic, are the parents schizophrenic?
Well, they say there's a genetic tendency,
Okay.
but I'm not sure that's accurate. I think what happens is the schizophrenic parents create in the child the conditions for these entities to move over into the child.
The
Okay.
fissures in their psyche, as I call them, cracks in their
Yes.
psyche.
Yep, exactly. And I've even talked to a couple that had schizophrenic parents, and they said I had to get away from them because I was starting to hear the voices myself. So I think it's more due to the horrible things that schizophrenics do to their sons and daughters that create like Anon said, the fissure in the psyche of the patient. So.
Yeah.
We've all been hoodwinked by the psychiatric mafia. The FDA is behind all this. They've what is it? The National Institute for Mental Health. They've reduced funding for research into schizophrenia to a mere dribble. And then they covered it up by altering the statistics to make it look like they were spending more for research. Schizophrenia is one of the top 10 illnesses on the planet, and they're spending virtually no money looking for a cure. The drug companies have paid off our Congress. They paid off our Senate. they've paid off the politicians, and they've cut the funding for research into schizophrenia into nothing. They do not want a cure. They want this to go on forever. They don't care whether these people are suffering from these voices. They're not looking for a cure. They're after the money. It's despicable. They've lied to us all. They've lied to the entire planet. You know, those drugs are toxic. They're poisonous. With long-term use, they will destroy your nervous system. And their whole entire DSM, their Bible of mental illnesses, is a complete work of fiction. So every single one of there are 296 of them now. They've been completely made up by a group of psychiatrists that meet maybe once every 3 years, and they get together and they go, "Hey, I got a new psychiatric diagnosis, and this is what it is." And they said that the atmosphere in that place was like a tobacco barn auction. They come in and they go, "Oh yeah, I got a new illness, I got a new disorder," and they vote on it to see if they can come up with some kind of drug, because 2/3 of the psychiatrists in that meeting have close ties to big pharma. So it's a completely controlled process.
If you have such a good business, you don't want to lose the grip of it.
They don't want to lose it. So what they're doing is they're fabricating these mental illnesses constantly. So in 1952, the DSM had 106 psychiatric disorders. In 1980, there were 256. The DSM-5 now lists 297 disorders, and they're fabricating more and more every year. So one psychiatrist...
They will end up by having the entire population of the planet suffering from some psychic disease, according to them.
Right. You can't go to a
and a pill will cure it, and a pill will cure it.
Of course, of course, of course.
Yeah, that's what they want you to believe. You know, but here's what one psychiatrist said that about the DSM. He said, every mental disorder in the DSM is defined by a list of behavioral symptoms that committees of psychiatrists have debated and decided which clusters of symptoms to add up to which labels of mental disorders. There are no blood tests, there are no lab tests, there's no x-rays, there's nothing that will objectively test for these disorders. And this DSM is taught in the universities like the Bible. When I was in the PhD program, they made you friggin' memorize half of that friggin' disorder stuff, even though it was friggin' made up. You know, I don't even think they know it was made up. I don't think the professors in the universities know it was made up. So they got all these crazy symptoms in there. They got caffeine disorder. So if you drink too much caffeine, you're disordered. They got Paris syndromes that, you know, if especially with Arabs, if they go to Paris, they get nervous. They say that's Paris syndrome. So,
sorry, but I can just laugh about it.
And they're putting adolescents and kids on these psychiatric drugs. You know, right now they have over 7 million kids on these toxic antipsychotic drugs that destroy their brains. They're giving them the kids. They don't care. You know, they're just making a fortune off of this stuff. So what they've done is they've what do you call it? What do you call it? Gas.
They've conned.
They conned. And what is it? Gassed something?
Gaslighting.
Gaslighted the entire population of the planet. You know, these drugs cure nothing. They're dangerous. They are toxic. Matter of fact, some of the schizophrenics would tell me that the voices are telling them that the psychiatrist is poisoning them with these drugs, and they point to the negative symptoms of these drugs as proof that the psychiatrist is poisoning them. And in fact, they are being poisoned because their nervous system is being rotted out slowly by these drugs. So that explains why the assault rate on psychiatrists is higher than it is on nurses, on psych nurses, on psychologists, on counselors. The only population in the state hospital that was assaulted at the same rate as psychiatrists were attendant staff that were with clients and patients 24 hours a day. So I wondered, that made no sense to me when I was working there. And when I found out after 7 years that that's what the voices were telling these patients, that made perfect sense as to why these psychiatrists that were only spending 15 or 20 minutes a month with these schizophrenic patients were being assaulted by them at a rate higher than anybody else at the hospital. So I'm gonna get off my soapbox here. I want you to hear from Anon, who has experienced this. He won his battle with the voices. So schizophrenia isn't a hopeless condition. There are things you can do about it, but the psychiatric drugs are not going to cure it. There's a place for those drugs with patients that are very violent, especially in the prison. I mean, if we didn't have these psych drugs in the prison with this criminally insane, we'd be in a lot of trouble. You know, there are some patients that are completely taken over by these voices or nearly taken over by these voices that you need those drugs to calm them down so they can be managed. Otherwise, somebody's going to get hurt. But for the regular person, it should not be a lifelong regimen. It's dangerous. These drugs are toxic. They have very toxic side effects, and they cause neurological damage with prolonged use.
The proper medical care, the objective should be is to get the patient off the medicines eventually, through proper counseling, proper spiritual work. That is definitely the best way to go. Short term, yes. Long term, no, with some of these pharmaceuticals.
Yep. Fully agree. Go for it, Anon.
So I just want to tell everybody that I reached out to Jerry probably about 2 or 3 years ago because I saw the great work that he was doing in regards to having actually recognizable patterns of what patients with schizophrenia encounter. And he's right on. I mean, some of the pattern specifics, how these very strong negative thoughts or negative voices in the schizophrenic's head will gaslight, they're bullies, they lie, they want the patient to isolate themselves. They will oftentimes convince the patient to kill themselves. I went through several times where these voices were trying to tell me to kill myself, that I wasn't worthy. They make their targeted patient feel worthless. I prefer to use the word target because I feel like these voices, they target, these entities target potential victims based on a lot of times the trauma that they've endured through their earlier life, which leaves, I guess, fissures or cracks in their psyche, and it kind of gives them a way to get in, almost like what Jerry mentioned, like sharks. They smell it and they can sense it.
And that isolation is right on. What they want to do is they don't want any interference with trying to take over the patient. So they make the patient as obnoxious as they possibly can to the parents or anybody else around them. So they just go, get out of here. Go in your bedroom and stay there and leave us alone. That's the worst thing that you could do for a schizophrenic, because now the voices have complete access to them and there's no distraction. They don't want any interference with them trying to take over the patient.
And they tend to get much louder, much more intense from like say about 2 a.m. to 5 a.m.
Yes.
Because they want their targets not to sleep. They want them to be in a very exhausted state because I think it makes it easier for them to go after them. The other thing is that Jerry mentioned early on, the idea that they're feeding on psychic energy. And I've since learned there's a slang for that psychic energy. It's called loosh, L-O-O-S-H. I've heard that just in the last few months because the target will feel very drained after these attacks. So going to my story here, I had graduated college back, I guess, about 1989, 1990, went for a degree in mechanical engineering. So I had a very scientific, logical mind. But I'd also taken some psychology courses in college. I took general psychology and abnormal psychology. So I was very aware of the DSM manual that we talked about, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual used for categorizing various aspects of mental illness. And I was very aware of schizophrenia because it was part of my studies in that particular course. So when I started having these symptoms, I was kind of in a state of cognitive dissonance for when it started. Because it's like, I know what my textbook says. But boy, this feels like something's trying to take over my body, almost like a potential takeover. Like I was having to deal with doing a self-exorcism on myself to keep some of these entities from commingling with my personality. So my symptoms started, I guess, 19, as I mentioned, when I graduated college, I started to I wanted to read the Bible on my own without any middleman. I was raised Greek Orthodox, attended a Methodist Sunday school, and participated in a Catholic youth group. So I was aware of some of the basic Christian ideology. I wasn't a Bible thumper or anyone out there going with the dogma of the religious aspects, but I tried to take the approach to be a good human being, be honest, integrity, have virtue, and just be a decent human being. That's kind of the way I took from what I was gathering out of the Bible. So when I started to read it for myself for the first time, I started to feel kind of very worthless. Like I was in my early adult years, I was kind of trying to determine what direction I want to go in life. And I feel like a lot of suppressed trauma was coming out too of my childhood. And as Jerry mentioned, a lot of these entities tend to go after those who've endured trauma. So everything was happening at once. The problem with the DSM manual is it tries to put specific mental illnesses in their own category. And that doesn't work because there's overlap. I think at times I was probably a little bipolar. At times I was manic. But an underlying condition, I was very depressed underneath all this before getting the diagnosis of schizoaffective affective disorder. So very strong thoughts or voices started to occur as I started to read the Bible over some months in 1990, 1989. And they kept saying that you're worthless. Give it up. Nobody's going to like you. You have no friends. You're a failure from the start. And they were trying to kind of make me kill myself. And I just started to get very, very depressed from all of these attacks because at this time, I'm still thinking it's my own mind doing this.
Yeah, no, that's very important. Is if the schizophrenic is going to recover, they have to understand that these voices are not who they are. They're separate because one thing that surprised me when I was doing some research, I thought they sounded different than the normal thoughts you have running through your head all the time. You know, like, yeah, we're the voices. No, they sound just like your regular thought, only the content and the intent is very different. So
they will use different vocabulary depending on the entity that you're dealing with or the entities. I've noticed that there's almost like there's a change in the intelligence level of how the voice is going about attacking you.
Yeah, that makes sense. But they sound virtually the same as your normal thoughts, right?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's what throws people off because, you know, they don't think, oh, where do thoughts come from? Or these thoughts may not be mine because you just, from the time you're born, you go, well, all the thoughts in my head are mine. And nobody says any different. You know, everybody believes that. But when you get to schizophrenia, those thoughts coming in are not yours. They belong to something else that means you no good. And you have to understand that and figure out which thoughts are coming in from outside and which thoughts kind of belong to you. That otherwise you're thinking that I'm attacking myself. My mind is attacking itself. What do I do about that? You know, and that's what psychiatry is pushing. Oh yeah, you're crazy, you're sick. So all you can do is take our meds. They don't do anything with the thoughts. You know, it's like, oh, just take these drugs and you know, just ignore them. You know, that doesn't work either. The first time I heard that, I brought the patient back in after the psychiatrist said, oh, they're hallucinations, ignore them. I brought him in a week later. I said, how's that going? He said, it doesn't work at all. They get louder when they're ignored.
I can't stress enough, if somebody is dealing with schizophrenia or has a relative dealing with schizophrenia, the very first step to recovery is to recognize that those negative voices and thoughts in their head are not their own. They're coming from an external source. Once the target recognizes that, then they can start to heal themselves. And yes. I'll probably repeat that throughout this presentation because that's one of the most important things to
it's
start
critical.
the recovery. So I was getting very depressed. I was not eating because these voices would tell me that I wasn't worthy of food. I think I probably dropped half my weight. I started seeing in black and white. I was getting so depressed I couldn't see colors anymore. I mean, I didn't want to get out of bed. I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't even, I couldn't think anymore. I mean, here I was, I'm a degree mechanical engineer, I couldn't even add 2 plus 2 together. I couldn't do math. I couldn't balance my checkbook because these negative thoughts and voices would take over. They would just dominate what was going on. And sometimes you just felt like you couldn't even think. So I was put on a very low dose of lithium at the time. I think they were thinking it was more some sort of depressive state. I wasn't actually diagnosed with schizophrenia yet, but just I got worse and worse. And I remember I woke up one morning and I was like thrashing around, like my arms and legs were moving. My head was kind of bobbing back and forth. And I remembered I would try to talk a lot of times and I couldn't. It's like something was not letting me speak. Like I would go to say words, it would kind of come out as like I couldn't find the train of thought to speak or to express myself. So I was submitted to the emergency room of a hospital because initial thought was it was an overdose of lithium or some sort of neurological condition. They did blood work and I think they did some scans, like MRI scans and everything. Nothing was showing up. So they concluded it was psychological, not neurological or an overdose of the lithium. If anything, I wasn't taking enough lithium because I couldn't even remember what time of the day it was sometimes. I couldn't even think about anything. Like the mind was just so overwhelmed, like you're in a daze. So I was submitted to a psychiatric hospital. I was in there about 4 weeks. This is late summer, early autumn of 1990. And as Jerry said, they don't know which drugs to give you to kind of snap you out of it. You're a guinea pig in there. They gave me all sorts of multicolored pills, different combinations. They give you a little cup each day. They would try this one, that one, and each day to try and kind of snap you out of your condition. And these pills, I mean, they're not the type of things that you want to take it for recreation or for fun. The side effects are awful. I mean, I remember having a dry mouth all the time. There's some days where I felt like I had 50-pound weights on each foot. I could barely move my muscles. I remember one time I would turn my head like this, and the scenes that I was looking at would kind of shift like that. It would take a while for me to catch up. So every time I moved my head, it's like it took a while for my vision to catch up with me. There's a few days in the psychiatric hospital I probably have no memory of, and I attribute that to the pharmaceutical drugs. So nothing was working. I was hearing very strong voices and negative thoughts, and I was assigned, I guess, a psychiatrist, a psychologist. I think I saw the psychiatrist maybe once a week, maybe 30 minutes at a time. There was group therapy. And of course, you're in the hospital. There's a lot of other people dealing with mental issues as well. And like you're trying to make yourself sane. So being around these people that are just as insane as you didn't necessarily help the situation. But I remember these voices. There was one night that the voices got very loud and intense. Like I was fighting them because I was treating this kind of as a spiritual religious battle, but I wasn't sure. I was going back and forth on the fence constantly saying, this is a genuine religious or spiritual experience, or this is just my mind playing tricks on me. I didn't know. I wasn't certain either way. But I remember one night in the hospital, it was a whole cacophony of voices. And this is where they had different tones or timbres. It sounded like men's voices, women's voices, children's, young adults. And they kept kind of attacking me, saying things. And they wouldn't allow me to sleep. It's like I'd be lying there all night long, just my eyes closed, but I was constantly hearing all the thoughts, all the voices continuously going on. But I remember eventually it became like a group of maybe 9 voices and then 8 voices, 7 voices or 5 voices. But it was like a committee. The whole cacophony got less and less and less. It became a committee of a few voices. But I distinctly remember one of those voices say, "What are we going to do about him?" And I felt like they were talking about me at the time. And at this point, I was actually hearing the voice not in my head, but almost outside, like around me. And this was at night. And I remember there was nobody in the hall at night. It wasn't like this was the staff talking to me. This was the voices in my own head doing this.
And I've heard that before too, where a group of them are talking from outside the head and kind of going, well, how should we kill him? You know, should we do this? Should we do that? Maybe we should do this. And the patient's hearing all this, like something is plotting against his life. So I've heard that several times.
They would say all sorts of things to put you in an agitated, anxious state. Throughout the ordeal too, like they kept they would come back and forth, tell me to kill myself. And they would tell me how to do it. Like sometimes it got very elaborate. Like one of the entities kept telling me to climb up a high voltage electrical tower and jump into the wires. They would get very dramatic sometimes. Other ones would tell me just to kill yourself with carbon monoxide poisoning. And I came pretty close to doing it sometimes. I will admit that, but I think I had higher thoughts that prevented me from doing that. Thank goodness.
See, so the game behind the suicide stuff is it creates a lot of negative emotional energy. It's not easy to kill yourself. And then here's your mind telling you to kill yourself, and you don't realize it's something else that's doing it. You think it's your own mind, and it causes a lot of fear and confusion. And then on top of that, they give you these psychiatric drugs. And this is a list of Anon side effects. It's skin rash, feeling of restlessness with inability to sit still, constipation, dizziness, drowsiness, excessive saliva production, extrapyramidal disease. It's like a involuntary movement of your tongue and your hands, generalized weakness, headache, nausea, weight gain, chest pain, fast heartbeat, low potassium in the blood, and it goes on and on. So you have the voices, like Anon is talking, already messing up your head, and then you have all these horrible side effects overlaying it. So it's like a hell on earth.
Oh, believe it, I felt like I was being dragged to the darkest depths of hell and despair through some of those times. I mean, it was a genuine existential crisis and a dark night of the soul that went on for months and months at a time. I mean, and these entities, they will dig up your own thoughts and use them against you, however minor they were. Like I remember I used to go fishing as a kid for like sunnies or bass or trout at local streams. And of course, to catch the fish, I'd use live bait, I'd hook the worm onto the hook. These entities would tell me what a worthless being I was. Like, see, you killed a worm and you kill and eat fish and everything. They would attack me for this stuff, like trying to make me feel as worthless as possible. And sometimes they would go in your memories and they could insert memories too, and they will change things around. They're just trying to keep you agitated in a state of, like, I guess, paranoia, agitation, upset, all those negative vibrational emotions. They're trying to amplify them or get more of that out of you.
To generate that negative emotional energy that they feed off of.
But this is very interesting because if they have access to your memories,
They do.
then they can use them against you big time.
And they do. They
And
can,
they do
can
that,
pull
yep.
in. I had one patient where he borrowed a quarter from somebody like 10 years ago, and he didn't pay him back, and the voices got in there. Oh, you ripped this poor guy off. You know, they can, since they're energetic, they can go in there and they can pull up every rotten thing you've ever done and throw it in your face to generate that negative emotional energy. And here
Guilt.
again, you're thinking, yeah, guilt and shame. And here you are thinking, oh, well, my mind's going nuts. I mean, what's going on here? And psychiatry has no explanation. Oh, just take these tranquilizers and you'll be fine. Oh, bull crap.
So I was approaching the fourth week of being in a psychiatric hospital. My health insurance was about to run out. Thank goodness I had a credit card, so I was unemployed at the time, and I was using this one credit card to pay all my bills, so cash advances, all my necessities. It was paying for my. Thank goodness I could still able to keep the health insurance, and it was paying for food or whatever rent I needed and other expenses. But I was reaching the final week there. My health insurance was about to run out, and so the doctor said, "Okay, we're going to try electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, otherwise known as shock therapy." So essentially, that's where they give you anesthesia, they knock you out, they give you a muscle relaxant, and they put electrodes on each side of your head, and they basically give the brain a shock. They send a current through it. And they were doing this kind of as a last resort because they felt like none of the medicines were working on me. My state was not changing at all. And I went through the first ECT treatment. And I remember when I woke up from it, I felt better. I mean, I felt like my mind was calm. I wasn't hearing the voices. I was still at feeling at rock bottom, super depressed, but I felt like I could start rebuilding myself from here as a human being again.
See, so that's where I think there's some link to electricity and these things, because we're getting reports from people who are using the Tesla violet ray and the TENS machine that the voices don't like that electricity. And I've noticed when I worked at the state hospital, when they gave those ECTs, the voices would disappear for days or weeks before that they would eventually come back. But there's something in that electricity that they just don't like, and it provides some relief. So what the word we're getting back from people using the Tesla violet ray is that it stops them from draining them, and sometimes it just shuts them up for a period of time. But there is some effect, positive effect to it. It has not gotten rid of them completely, totally, but it seems to help.
Temporary reprieve.
Could it be because you mentioned Tesla violet ray, and there are also other devices like Rife machines, plasma therapy? Could it be because you mentioned that these voices are actually energy entities, subtle entities, feeding off negative energy? Right. And when you do a therapy with Tesla violet ray or plasma therapy, it raises your frequency, and then they don't have access to you anymore because your energies are now positive instead of negative.
Could be, but there does seem to be some positive effect to it. So those doing research ought to look into that, because these entities are energetic. They're not physical. They don't respond to what psychiatry is doing is like dumping a bunch of Thorazine or Anon or some psychiatric drug onto a magnetic field and expecting that to do something. It doesn't get rid of the voices. It may lower them because you're being tranquilized. You're not as upset, and the voices don't like that. So they don't want these patients taking these drugs, because it does calm them down, and they don't want them calmed down. They wanted them as wrapped up and guilty and anxious and paranoid as they can get them, because that's what they feed off of, the negative emotional energy that those energetic states generate.
And throughout this ordeal, at times I felt like something was trying to take over my body, like a attempt of possession. That's what I was looking for. And even though I have a scientific, rational mind, that's what it felt like. Like I was trying to fight this negative, evil persona from kind of taking over, merging with who I was. So I went through a total of 6 ECT treatments. They insisted I had to have 6. They would do it every other day for about 2 weeks. But I felt better after the first one. I didn't feel any different between the first ECT and the 6th ECT as far as my mental faculties go. So they discharged me. That was probably beginning of the autumn of 1990. I was assigned a psychiatrist and a psychologist, and the very strong negative thoughts and voices were gone for a while, but they came back. I think I was discharged maybe in September or October, and the negative thoughts and voices came back around December of 1990. But they were different this time. It was almost like I was going through a series of trials or tests or tribulations. But I remember various stages. I remember the first stage, it was weird. They're making me an offer of Bamin. Basically, they were offering me a path to instantaneous wealth, power, and riches if I essentially kind of sold my soul to it or gave up on what I kind of thought my life direction or life quest would be. These tormentors, they were trying to make a Faustian bargain with me. And they actually showed me a path to very quickly gaining riches, wealth, and fame and power. But I'd be required to give up my ethics and my morality to do so. It was like they're offering me a Faustian bargain. And again, I'm still in a state of cognitive dissonance of like, what is going on in my mind here? Is this actually my mind just playing tricks on me? Or is this something real, like demons or archons coming from the outside here and trying to make these deals with me?
Yeah, they offered me a lottery number once. I didn't take it.
So I said no to the offer just because I felt like it wasn't coming from a very good place, and they weren't too happy about that. They kept kind of persisting, and also I didn't really know if I'd be able to handle the type of power that they were going to show me. I mean, some of them were offering like the secrets of the universe, and I said, with that type of responsibility, a lot of responsibility comes with having that type of knowledge. I didn't want it because I knew I was in my mid-20s. I'm a human being with my vulnerabilities and susceptibilities. I didn't want to have that type of knowledge. I just didn't think I would use it properly.
And now I wonder about all those who are rich, have fame and power, how they got it.
Yeah.
It makes you think. It makes you wonder about it.
And
Yeah.
especially you look at the state of the world right now.
So I mean, it was very tempting, that offer, because I was in a state of, my income that level was below poverty level. I didn't have a job. I was just trying to pay the bills, the credit card. I think I had a nickel in my checking account. And the next stage, these, I'll call them entities for now, they would make you feel extreme guilt and shame. They would list every morsel of meat that I ever ate, every fly or worm that I killed. And they were like pointing at every flaw in my character. They were doing everything they could to make me feel that I was worthless, that I was a horrible person, that I didn't deserve to exist or live. And I started arguing against them. I said to them, okay, God created me with teeth, tongue, and mouth. Do I not have a right to use them? I said, meat is made to taste flavorful and provides the most amount of protein per unit volume. I said, God encourages some animals to eat other animals. Human beings eat other animals. We're part of the food chain, if we like it or not. I said, how can you attack me for this? Animals that do this. I said, take your arguments to God, not to me. So I started taking this approach. Excuse me for a moment. I started standing up to these entities.
That's what needs to be done.
And a later stage, the entities started saying how pathetic I and humanity are. Like, I felt it reached a point where it wasn't just attacking myself, but it was also attacking all of humanity. And I was acting like a representative or an advocate or a defense attorney for myself and all of humanity. And it started to say how we're insignificant lumps. Our bodies are insignificant lumps of flesh, blood, and bone, destined to rotting in the grave and being eaten by bacteria or worms. And I counter-argue this argument. I said, okay, we didn't decide the composition of our flesh, blood, or bones. I said it was, our bodies were granted to us or forced upon us. I said in defense of these prosecuting thoughts, how do you condemn our form when we had no say or control over their creation? I said, take your arguments to God, not to me. And what happened is, in this stage ended very early. It's like the prosecuting entities, the adversarial entities, took away their stance on this because they realized that my case argument was very strong. I was saying, hey, you're mocking my body. I didn't make my body. You know, this is the way I became. So then that dawned on me that I realized that I could stand up to these voices or entities. And if I can defend against them enough and realize that they're kind of like gaslighting or lying, they backed off.
They're liars. They're consummate liars. They lie about everything.
They don't seem to be extremely intelligent because your arguments were common sense.
Well, some of them are very intelligent, very sly, and some of them are very stupid.
Okay.
You know, there's a whole range of that. But one thing I want to point out is they're consummate liars. They lie about virtually everything. All they want to do is get the victim upset. They'll tell them any lie that they will believe. There was one case where this happened twice, where they told the patient, if you gouge out your eye, we will disappear and we won't come back. So the patient gouged out his eye, and right away they showed up and started mocking him and making fun of him and say, now you look like a freak. Nobody's going to want to be around you. You're ugly, and look how stupid you are believing us. So this is the kind of thing they are. They are not good. They're evil.
But this is also a key, because if they are lying all the time, then when you hear voices like that, when you have thoughts like that, you have to tell yourself this is not true.
Yeah, that's a lie. That's a lie. So that's how Sherry Sweeney, my co-author, recovered. She would just keep telling them, that's a lie, that's a lie, that's a lie. And what that does is it kind of blows them off. But if you ignore them, then you're holding them there. It's like whatever you resist persists. So if you're trying to ignore them and you're resisting what they're saying, they're staying there. You're holding them there. But if you say that's a lie and you're a liar, it just kind of glances off of you. So that's a very powerful technique when any intrusive negative thought comes in. Just think about it and go, well, that's a friggin' lie. Get out of here.
Also powerful technique, I believe it's what Anon says. Take it to God.
Yes.
Take argument to God.
So I went through these various stages, and I remember a later stage, these entities kept trying to tell me and humanity that we were an abomination, that we didn't deserve to exist. It's like something entered my mind. It was judging me and humanity based on my experiences. It would like use my own memories as evidence to show how awful human beings are. It's like I was becoming a star witness, and it actually started to flash scenes before my eyes. Like I was seeing like a cinematographic movie, watching scenes of wars, violence, destruction caused by humanity. And it would like replay all these images to keep trying to tell me that humanity does not deserve to exist. They're worthless. They're a virus, a plague. And it would replay these scenes and say, see how horrible humanity is? They will never evolve. So it's almost like an adversarial inquisition that was going on at this stage. And I would defend against these.
This is also very interesting, speaking about evolution.
Yeah, I'm thinking in terms of more like, I guess, maybe evolution of consciousness as opposed to evolution of body.
Yes,
that's I think that's where they were coming from. And I would defend against these charges. I would stand up to them. And sometimes I'd be talking out loud to them. If nobody's around, I was talking out loud to them. If people were in the room or if I was around other people, I would keep my mouth closed, but I would talk internally to them. So it kind of go back and forth how I would address these entities. And I knew my mind was not right at the time. It wasn't like, oh, I'm perfectly normal. No. I knew that I was off. I knew that something was not right with what was going on in my mind. So I was very aware that my mind was not right in what it was dealing with here.
See, and there's a point there too, because the educational institutions, the psychiatric mafia, they are all saying that these voices are auditory hallucinations. So when you think of a hallucination, you think of, they're just word salad. They don't make any sense. So that's one of the things that really surprised me when I graduated, got out of graduate school, and I went to work at the state hospital, is that these voices were talking to patients in complete, understandable, logical sentences. It wasn't word salad like a hallucination. It was complete sentences, complete thoughts, and they were responding with complete thoughts. There was a conversation going on. It wasn't a hallucination. There was a coherent conversation taking place, and that blew me away, because all these years they're talking about auditory hallucinations, which, hallucinations are random. They're just all over the place. To discover that these things weren't hallucinations, that they were carrying on coherent conversations with these patients, blew me away. I went, well, that's another lie they told.
And also something that I react to. The entities were telling you that humankind is an abomination because all the horrible things we do. But there are the entities pushing us to do horrible things. So it's not even logical what they do there.
It's called gaslighting or projection.
Gaslighting.
Yeah.
In other words, they're blaming you for the things that they're causing.
Exactly.
And and what Jerry mentioned about the full conversations, like it can escalate. I felt like the entities that I was dealing with throughout this ordeal started to get more intelligent. Like I was going up some sort of managerial hierarchy with this, because some of the entities,
levels.
some of the entities are just trying to agitate you. Like they might just say one word over and over again, or just they'll say things to kind of upset you. But later on in this ordeal, and I'm probably approaching winter of 1991 at this point in time, it became full conversations. I mean, full discussions back and forth were going on. So in this particular stage, I mentioned that they were basically saying that humanity is an abomination. They were showing me all the violence and evil and wickedness that goes on with our species. And I would defend against these charges. I would tell them, yes, there are some human beings that are evil, wicked, ignorant, and full of hatred. I said, but there's others that are good, compassionate, kind, and full of love. And I put forth my defense against this particular charge that you don't condemn an entire species, religion, or culture based entirely on the actions of a few. So in other words, you don't condemn our entire species because of what some of us have done. You've got to look at each individual on a case-by-case basis. So the next stage, as I would move along through this, well, I'll just say I went through additional stages like this for the interest of time. I don't want to go through all of them, but there were several stages like this where they would bring up different charges and different things. Like I was going through a series of adversaries, like a criminal court in a sense, and I defend myself against these charges. Like they were trying to prove to myself that I wasn't worried, that humanity wasn't worthy. And at one time they started telling me that, you know, if you tell anybody about what we're saying or these experiences, that your family, your doctor, the clergy, and society, they'd all think that you were a mad lunatic and no one would listen to you, that you'll be locked up. You'll be locked up for the rest of your life in an insane asylum.
They do that all the time. They don't want anybody to know what they're telling. They don't want anybody to know that they even exist. They want the rest of the world to believe that the victim is crazy, just like psychiatry is pointing out. You know, oh, their mind is broken. They're not right. It's something chemical imbalance in their brain. They want that. They don't want the population to know that they are entities and that they're causing these symptoms.
But it sounds like their trick number one. People not believing they exist.
Right.
They were basically threatening me. You know, if you reveal us, this is what's going to happen to you. They were threatening me because they were scared. I mean, there's a reason they don't want to be known or revealed what they're doing.
Yeah, because if you know they exist, you will defend yourself.
Yes. They don't want you to even know they exist, so you can't defend yourself. So the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was getting people to believe that he doesn't exist.
Exactly.
So I don't know if these attacks, the stages, the torments, the trials and tribulations were from multiple entities, or if they're all from the same beings, just kind of changing form. There's different views on this as far as if it's how it actually all works beyond the veil. But all that I can say is it seemed like each of the stages I went through, it seemed like it was a different approach. It was a different method of attacking me. There was different vocabulary used and how they would discuss. You could tell it was almost like different personalities, so to speak, I guess, for lack of a better word. But they generally all made it sound like it was your voice. And again, I'm still on the fence. You know, is this my own head playing these tricks, or what's going on here? Is this coming from the outside? So I'm approaching summer, fall of 1991 now. Been dealing with months of these attacks and torments, dealing with the stigma of being diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. Not sure if I'm going to be sane or normal again. They had me on a low dose of Klonopin at this point in time as kind of a mood stabilizer. I hated being on any sort of drugs for my mental faculties. I wanted to be off the drugs. And thank goodness nobody told me that this was a lifelong sentence. And maybe because I never heard that, I assumed that I could cure myself of this or work towards getting off the meds. So the final stage, I was at rock bottom. I mean, I was ready to kill myself. I didn't know if this was just my mind playing tricks on me. I didn't know what was going on here. I didn't know if this was some more profound divine battle that I was authentically fighting. But something kept trying to tell me that God does not exist. Give it up. Your faith is stupid. It's worthless. It's total fantasy. There is no afterlife. You human beings are just random molecules that happen to combine and form into life. You have no higher purpose. You're nothing. It was basically trying to destroy any ounce of faith that I had left in me. Just keep in mind, it was my faith that has kept me going this long to fight these things. And here it is. These things they're being anti-religious again. You know, why would a hallucination sit there and tell you that God doesn't exist?
Yeah, good point.
So I was getting desperate at this point. I was starting to lose my faith. And I started praying to God, or the highest essence of what I thought God should be. I said, God, give me a sign. Give me a sign that you are there. I said, I need to know if this is just my own head playing these tricks on me. I need to know if there's something really attacking me. I need to know if this is a true spiritual battle or what's going on here. I did the most intense possible praying I could for about 2 weeks. This is all happening in the autumn, fall of 1991. I'm at rock bottom. If I didn't receive a sign, I probably would have killed myself, because I was kind of like, what's the point of existence if this is all we are, just our bodies? I didn't care what the sign was. I didn't specifically ask what the sign should be. I wanted God to decide that. But I knew if the sign was right, that it would be significant enough for me to know that it came from God or some sort of divine source. If a Bible had arrived in the mail by mistake, I would have accepted that as a sign. If a priest had knocked on my door, I would have accepted that as a sign. Now, at this point in time, I wasn't going to church really. I was not on any recreational drugs. I wasn't drinking. I wasn't touching any type of marijuana or anything like that, because I wanted to face this head on. I didn't want to be self-medicating to get through this thing. I felt like part of me felt like this was a genuine spiritual, religious battle that I had to get through. And I had to fight it face on, face forward. So after 2 weeks of some of the most intense praying, something kind of profound occurred. I woke up one morning about 2 a.m. with the sense that something was in the room. Now I have a PowerPoint presentation, and I can share this with you and your audience to see exactly what it is that a schizophrenia encountered. So let me go to share screen here. Bear with me as I get the technology set up. Okay, do you see the inside view of a room here?
Yep.
So this is the room I was in at the time. It was actually in the childhood home of my upbringing. And I mentioned I've been praying for God to give me a sign. I didn't care what it was. I didn't specifically state what it should be. I woke up one morning with the feeling, and this is about 2 a.m., there's something in the room with me. There's a presence in the room. I could just sense it. I could feel it. I'm looking around. I don't see anything. Do you see kind of a square right now?
Yes.
Is there a slide? So that's my square ceiling light fixture. I'm lying on my back, looking up. I'm in my bed, lying on my back, looking up, sensing something's in the room. I don't see anything. What's going on here? And that's my square light ceiling fixture above my head there. All of a sudden, I start to see this kind of darkish, grayish, silverish, smoke-like essence coming into the room. And at first I thought it was an electrical fire occurring in the light fixture wiring. But I realized the smoke's coming in, not where the wiring goes into the light fixture. And it wasn't coming in from the ceiling. It was coming in from a plane about a foot or so below the ceiling. And it wasn't moving like smoke. It was moving almost like the way food coloring would move if you put a drop of, like, say, black food coloring in water. It had kind of a very fluidic motion to it. I don't know if it was sentient in itself, but it was moving kind of strangely. And I didn't quite know what was going on here. And then it dawned on me. Oh, great. I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and now I'm starting to have visual hallucinations. I'm thinking my schizophrenia is getting worse. So here it is. I have schizophrenia, and but yet I'm very aware this is a hallucination occurring, or visual hallucination. You know, there's something to that, because if you feel like if the patient's really out, they wouldn't think that this is part of their schizophrenia. But I was self-aware to understand that this was just the schizophrenia advancing itself. So I'm watching it, and I start to see kind of this dark portal open up in the center of this cloud that's forming in my room. And it was kind of like a fog, a cloud-like essence, the way it was forming. And I could see the dark portal or gateway was opening up in the center of this cloud. Now, I was frightened at this point, but I was more curious than anything, because the scientist in me was like, okay, I'm diagnosed with schizophrenia. Let's see what this is. Let's see what my brain is trying to tell me. So this portal gets bigger and bigger, and I can see that this smoke or fog-like essence is actually entering into the room through the portal, because I could see it pouring out from the inside circumference of this oblong portal or gateway that's forming in my room in the center where this cloud was starting to develop. The portal's getting bigger and bigger. I'm looking into it. It's pitch black. I really can't see anything in there. And all of a sudden, whoosh, I see these two snake-like or serpentine tails move from bottom to top in the portal. I was a little taken aback. I'm like, okay, what is that thing? Again, I'm on the fence if this is really a visual hallucination, a vision, or if this stuff is actually materializing in my room. I really wasn't certain either way. But I watched these snake-like movements in this portal, and I was thinking, whatever it is, at least it's on the other side of this portal. It's not in my room yet. But I spoke too soon on that. So I see the end of the tail as it moves up, moving in the portal. More and more of the smoke or fog-like essence is pouring into the room, and it's getting very thick. It reached a point where I really couldn't see the portal or the gateway, but I knew it was there. And the cloud's getting very thick in my room. And then suddenly I see the serpentine or snake-like movements in the cloud itself. It's like they were slithering or moving in and out of where the border was between the cloud and the rest of the room. And I'm getting a little frightened at this point. I'm not sure where this is going to go. So I see the slithering movements, which meant that this entity was coming out of the portal and entering into my room, coming into the cloud. And then for a moment there, I didn't see any of the slithering movements, but I could still see kind of the cloud moving where the slithering movements had occurred. And then all of a sudden, the entity pops out of the cloud. And this is exactly what it looked like. Because I remember the emotions that I felt when I first saw this. I was a little taken aback. Part of me was laughing on the inside, because I'm thinking to myself, I'm diagnosed with schizophrenic disorder. This is what my brain decides to come up with. Some sort of strange creature that has like a snake-like, dog-like face on it, or head on it, with a serpentine body. This entity had a mane. I distinctly remember that. I could see it so clearly. It had like whiskers, and there's a seam that seemed to run down its side. And I'm not sure, it seemed to be that it had two tails when I saw it in the portal, or I was seeing more than one entity. But when it came out, the two tails seemed to act as one member, like that there's that seam that runs down its side. I think I believe, where the two tails might have came together. So this entity enters the room and pops out of the cloud. And I was thinking I was going to see a bunch of other weird things pop out of the cloud. Basically, it's just my mind playing tricks on me. I thought I was going to see like a duck on a turtle's body, or a frog on like a bird's body, other weird animal hybrids of some sort or another. So I came across this for the last few years. These are icons, or well, sometimes they call them Abraxas stones, but this is probably from the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th century. And this is an entity first referred to as Chnubis, which is an Egyptian deity. So this is going back almost 4,000 years to about 2000 BC if it's referred to as Chnubis. And you can see there's a seam running down the side of this, which is so similar to what I saw here. And the face looks kind of lion, dog-like. It's mammalian, whatever the face is that is attached to this serpentine or snake-like body. And there's a bit of a mane here. And I remember that this entity that entered my room also had a mane as well. And here's some Roman gold amulets or jewelry from the 3rd to 4th century with, again, this entity on it. And even on the amulet, and this is, close to the time of Jesus Christ, you can even see there's a seam on the side of this entity. Now, the Gnostics, for those that are familiar with Gnosticism, refer to this entity called Chnubis also as Yaldabaoth. It goes by a few other names, Samuel, Ialdabaoth, the Demiurge, and sometimes it's referred to as Abraxas, although that's not as clear because Abraxas could be an entirely different entity. And I just discovered these images online probably the last 3 or 4 years. When this creature or being came out of the cloud, I had no idea what it was. I mean, I was taken aback. I didn't know what was happening. I had no point of reference to even know what this entity or creature was. Yet here it is. Our ancestors knew about this entity back around the time of Christ and even a few thousand years beforehand. So then the creature comes fully into the room and faces me head on. This is exactly what it looked like. From the front, it looked like a disheveled lion, and had a lion-like face to it. I remember it had a plump muzzle. I could see whiskers and stubble on its face very clearly. Its hair and mane was kind of rather ragged looking, almost like it'd been in a few cat fights. And I recall that its left eye seemed to be scratched out, or it might have been blind altogether. Almost like it'd been in a cat fight. And one of the names for this entity is Samiel, and that kind of means the blind one or the blind god. And that is kind of rather interesting that there's a reference to this entity as being called Samiel, meaning blind. So as I'm looking on it face on, it didn't look that ominous at this point. I was more kind of curious. I'm just thinking, okay, this is a very strange visual hallucination, but I don't know if this is a hallucination. This could really be in my room. So I'm lying on my back, just watching this thing come in and at me. I don't recall if there's any noises or other smells occurring in the room because I was so focused on the visual aspects of what was occurring. Then all of a sudden, it lunges at me, and it changes into the most horrible face one can think of. It was kind of a combination of an old hag or man of decay. It looked very grotesque, hobgoblin-like. It could even have some lizard-like qualities to it. But I remember it was very prunish, grayish, wrinkled-like. Just an awful-looking face compared to the previous face that it came into the room with. And it seemed to open its mouth almost with like a howling, screaming expression, like it was either come to devour me or to devour my soul. I didn't think I was going to survive this experience. And this entity seemed extremely powerful. I felt like fighting it would have been ridiculous. I would have no chance against defeating this thing. So I chose to do something that was counterintuitive. When this face changed, I felt goosebumps all over my body. Every cell in my body was in a state of extreme fright or horror. And I remember thinking, if I'm going to die like this, I don't want to feel this way. And all this happened probably within a few seconds of the face changing and me feeling like an extreme state of horror or fright. But I felt like time was probably a little distorted with what was going on here. So what I did is I decided not to fight it. I decided just to lower my ego. I felt like, okay, you're very evil. You're coming here to destroy me. I mean, I could sense evil coming from it. At least that's what my body was telling me. I lowered my ego and I didn't fight it or resist it. I didn't want to feel the fright or terrifying state that it put me in. So I projected love onto it. I just said to myself, okay, you're coming to destroy me. You seem to be extremely evil. I'm just going to project love on you because I'm not going to die feeling like this. I don't know if the thought to do that was specifically my own thoughts or if a higher power put that in my head to do that. But anyhow, that's what I chose to do when this thing came in and just came at me. I just projected love upon it. The next thing I know, it seemed to disappear, pulverize, or vaporize. I just remember it was coming right at me, projected love on it, and it just seemed to go away. I didn't expect to survive this. I really thought this was going to be the end of my existence. I thought I was going to die here. And I realized I was still alive, or at least I think I was still alive. But the ordeal's not over. The next thing I know, there's a new entity hovering overhead. And this entity was more in the upper right-hand corner of the room, where the previous entity had like pulverized or disappeared a little bit lower in the image when it came at me. So I realized this ordeal is not over. But this new entity was entirely different than the previous one. And I'm not an artist, I'm an engineer, so I tried to kind of representation of the face, but you have to visualize this face was the most beautiful thing you ever saw. It was sheer beauty. It was kind of like an illuminated ivory face. And there were these like energy fluctuations moving behind it. And they could easily be interpreted as wings. They looked like bronzes, goldish, yellowish wings. And the wings were like fluttering behind the head. And sometimes it would kind of move it in front of its face and it was moving all around. And I became aware that I was aware of this entity being in my room, but it didn't seem to be aware of me yet. Like it's just sitting there with its eyes closed. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, what's going to happen next? This entity is so beautiful. I'm thinking it's probably going to turn something horrible and come at me like the previous one did. I was almost ready to run out of the room just out of respect for this entity because I felt like this second entity was so beautiful and was from a different realm that I, as a mere human mortal, did not deserve to even look at this face. It was undescribable beauty is the best way I could explain it. And then I came across this in the internet over the last few years. And keep in mind, I had this experience back in 1991. There was no internet back then. I wasn't into the occult. I wasn't reading any other type of religious or spiritual books. I was just reading primarily the New Testament of the Bible back then. But these are various entities or forms that I've seen online. And if you look in the lower left-hand corner, I think that's referred to as a seraph or seraphode. I can't remember. One's the plural, one's the singular name for it. But there it is. It's like a beautiful face and then these kind of wings fluttering around it. And that's something that I guess is mentioned in the Bible. But the upper images are just a good way to envision kind of what the face looked like. But I remember the eyes were closed at first when I first encountered it. So it felt like a few minutes went by, but then all of a sudden the eyes of this beautiful entity opened. And I realized, oh, now it's aware of me. I'm thinking, what's going to happen next? The wings are fluttering back and forth. The cloud that was there is starting to dissipate a little bit. And I wasn't sure if this entity was judging me. I'm not sure if it was a being that had been in prison and suddenly it was free, but it wasn't aware that it was free yet. Almost like, you open up a jail cell. Sometimes it can take a prisoner a while to walk out because they're so used to being in there. They're not sure if they're actually free or not. So we're just staring at each other. I'm looking at it. It's looking at me. Its wings are fluttering back and forth. Sheer beauty, undescribable beauty. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I'm just kind of waiting. And then all of a sudden, this beautiful entity with the fluttering yellowish, bronzish, goldish wings, it smiles at me. It was a smile of grace, because I remember I could even see dimples in the corner of its mouth form when it smiled at me. And it was interesting that the face, it was a very humanoid looking face, which was kind of interesting. And it looked kind of androgynous, but I kind of felt it was of a feminine nature. So when it smiled at me, the lips even went up and everything. It's almost like it was smiling, I felt, to let me know everything's going to be okay. I don't know if it was thanking me, but upon smiling at me, I just felt this wave or blast come from it of love, ecstasy, bliss. It was ecstatic in the sense, it was just such a connection. Like I and this being were somehow connected in a certain way, or we were connecting. So the next thing I know, I'm starting to have an out-of-body experience. The cloud has dissipated farther, the portal's still there. This being is starting to rise up towards the portal in reverse, and I'm coming out of my body with it. I'm having an out-of-body experience. I'm starting to merge with this being. It's like we're merging together and becoming one being. And I'm just in this undescribable state of love, bliss, ecstasy, joy, contentment. And just as I and this entity are about to 100% merge and become kind of one being, and we're about to exit out of the room and go into this portal or gateway, I was put to sleep, or I fell back asleep. And I say I was put to sleep because it wasn't like I gradually fell back asleep. It's like just as I crossed into the portal, being one with this entity, everything went gray, then everything went black. Now, I don't know what this entity, the second entity was. I don't know if it was my holy guardian angel. I don't know if it was my higher self. I don't know if it's what the Gnostics referred to as the Aeon Sophia. There's many different ways of describing what this second entity was. But all that I know is after having this experience or encounter with this second entity, my will to live returned. I felt like this was the proof that I was asking of God to give me some existence of divinity. I needed to know. And I didn't tell anybody about this visual encounter or experience. I didn't tell my counselor because for two reasons. I didn't want her to start prescribing more potent psychotropic drugs that I was on. I was currently on Klonopin. I didn't want something stronger. My objective was to get off the medicines and to return to at least a somewhat sane state. And two, this was the only thing holding me together at this point in time. It gave me the hope and will to live again. I didn't want my counselor to say, oh, it's just a visual hallucination, to ignore it. And then some 30 years later, to come across these images on the internet and to realize this is what was I encountered, it definitely says there's something going on in other realities and realms of existence. I have a very logical
spiritual battle.
It's a spiritual battle. I have a very logical scientific mind, but I can't deny what I went through here. And I have to apply logic to accept it. So my schizophrenia started to subside after that point drastically. I mean, I was still hearing some of the strong negative thoughts or voices after this, but it was much easier to resist them. I would just kind of laugh at them. I was saying, no, I said, you revealed yourself. And I guess I'm referring to the first entity in that case. Having that vision gave the proof that I needed that it wasn't just weird things going on in my head, that there was a real profound spiritual or religious battle going on here. And I was able to start rebuilding myself as a human being. I was able to get on with my life and career. I mean, it took a couple of years to kind of get back out there and everything. But one of the difficulties is having such a profound experience like this, and then having to kind of reinsert yourself back into the mundane world. You know, you got to pay the bills, you got to earn a living, you got to take care of your material existence and your material life. But here it is that I see something that the ancient Gnostics had talked about years ago. They talk about this stuff in the Nag Hammadi library, in the Gnostic scriptures that were found in the mid-1940s. There's even talk of a snake-like entity named Yaldabaoth that lives in a cloud, that's his throne. And it talks about Sophia and her error as an Aeon. And so there's some connection between Sophia, the second entity, and that first entity called Yaldabaoth. And some of the Gnostic scriptures state that Yaldabaoth is actually the child of Sophia. So there's various scriptural interpretations of these entities. They're not always in agreement, but there is something going on beyond the veil of our normal existence. And I'm not so sure the Gnostics understood it 100% correctly what's going on, but something's going on. But this is proof that what I was going through was a genuine, authentic spiritual battle or encounter. As I mentioned before, I don't know if it was a test, a trial, tribulation. I don't know if I was an experiment. I don't know if it was some sort of initiatory exercises. But I survived the ordeals. And I haven't been on any medicines for schizophrenia since about 1992 or 1993. And I'm living proof that schizophrenia doesn't have to be a life sentence. It can be cured. You definitely have to work on a more positive attitude in dealing with life, because those negative entities, the evil entities, they want to amplify your lower vibrations, your negative emotions such as fear, anxiety, stress, hatred, anger,
shame,
guilt. They're trying to amplify all those. So you have to kind of retrain yourself to not feel that way in order to go in a more positive direction. And I'm doing relatively well these days. I've had a successful career as a mechanical engineer, a great family. I own my own home and everything. And I admit, I slip up sometimes now and then, as everyone else. I have my ups and lows throughout life, as we all do. But by just knowing that there is something beyond this world, that we are more than just our physical bodies, we do have a soul or a spirit. It's just defining it is what gets to be difficult. And there's all this spiritual literature out there that talks about these experiences. Some contradicts, some coincides. But I just felt it was very nice to know that, yes, there is more meaning to our life than just this physical world.
I'd like to sum up a little bit here. We're coming to at the end here. Let's take a look at what's happening on this planet right now as far as the Western mental health system. In the US alone, there's close to 50,000 people kill themselves every year, year after year after year after year. That doesn't happen by not thinking. There's some thought gets into their head saying exactly what Anon was saying. You're worthless, you're stupid, you're no good. Why don't you just end it all? And they do. Those medicines that the psychiatric mafia are putting out are not stopping this. This is the same number or close to this number of soldiers, US soldiers who died in Vietnam over 10 years. And this is happening year after year after year. And you look at the mental health centers here, they're packed to overflowing. The psychiatric hospitals are packed to overflowing. The prisons, the mentally ill, since they shut down a number of the psychiatric hospitals over here because they say it costs too much. So these people are ending up in prisons where it costs twice as much. So they have whole psychiatric units in the prisons. A lot of schizophrenics end up in the prison because they can't afford to, they can't work, they can't function. So they sell drugs, they steal, they rob, they do different kinds of things to survive. And then you look at the TV violence here in the US. I mean, murder mysteries, violence, wars, people shooting each other. I mean, it's like by the time somebody gets to 18 years old, they've seen thousands and thousands of murders on TV, which is it's kind of suggesting, hey, this is the way you handle when you get angry. This is how you handle it. Go get a gun and shoot somebody, and then they try to take away your right to a gun over here. So they're allowing these violent video games that should never be allowed. I mean, they're affecting the minds of these adolescents. They're making them violent along with these violent movies and these violent video games. Ouija boards are very dangerous. I'd give the Western mental health system an F. They're not curing anybody. People are getting worse. They're coming out of the prisons in worse shape, more hardened, more violent than they ever went in. Things are getting worse. This system is not working. There has to be a spiritual component which they're totally ignoring.
And also with regards to the TV and all the crime series and murder and violence, They are making all the movies. Sometimes I watch just to see how they made them up. They made them so that violence, aggression, murder, it's something entertaining and funny,
Yes. Yes.
which is completely perverse. Instead of portraying it as it is, something which is abominable, it's horrible. Nobody should do that, and it's something which is really demonic. They make it something funny and entertaining.
So what these entities are doing, I mean, they're out there in the world, and their methodology is divide and conquer, divide and conquer. They love the strife between humanity, the extremes of, left-wing extremism, right-wing extremism. They don't want humanity to reach a middle ground. And I mean, they're encouraging this political divide that we see in our country. They are over in Gaza feeding off the trauma that's going on over there. I mean, these entities, they love wars.
Yeah, Ukraine, it's a hog's trough for them. All the suffering and the death and the dying over there. They love it.
But I think you mentioned somehow you mentioned the cure to it. If you can feel love, they will not stand it. They will go away. If you can manage to feel love, they will go away from you. If you can manage to raise your energies and feel optimism and positive energies, simply they will go away.
Yeah, they hate to be sent love. I've heard that over and over again. If you send them love, they can't. It's like burning them with a blowtorch. They can't stand it. They can't stand the 23rd Psalm or any of the Psalms. They don't want you to go to church. They don't want you to be spiritual. They want you to, like Anon was saying, they want you to feel like you're just some nothing that doesn't never going to amount to anything.
Part of the cure is pursuing more of a spiritual path, a
Yes.
benevolent, positive spiritual path. Doesn't matter what one chooses. One can take the better aspects of some of the Eastern religions. There's good aspects even within some of the Islamic religions. There's good aspects within the Christian religions. And of course, we get the distortions out there too. The people distorting those religions to justify violence and hatred and everything. That's not what this true spiritual texts were really meant for. So one has to be kind of selective in how they go about doing it. There's esoteric information out there as well, but the idea is to know yourself, improve yourself, learn to become a better being. Learn how to deal with people who are unfair to you, how to deal with them in a fair and reasonable manner. Learn how to deal with people who trespass against you. Don't react with them with revenge and violence. There's a better way to approach that. You have to focus on the transcendent long term of existence. You have to focus on more the aspects of eternity, not the short term, hot, reactive situations. You've got to let your spiritual logic dominate your thoughts, as opposed to hot, reactive emotions that can cause some very short term. Can cause some damage in the short term and long term. The idea is to be aware of yourself, be calmer, be more attuned to what's going on around you. Look at the other person's perspective. You don't have to agree with it, but look into the other person's perspective as well.
But what you say, it's the essence of all the authentic spiritual traditions. They are teaching humankind how to be a better human being, how to have the connection to the spiritual dimension, how to love more. It's the essence of all authentic spiritual traditions. So we were given the key.
Follow the 10 Commandments. I mean,
yes.
Follow the 10 Commandments and watch the thoughts coming into your head. Pay attention to what's coming in and what you're putting in. Don't watch violent TV and play violent video games. And Ouija boards are very dangerous. I've seen a number of people go psychotic using Ouija boards. Drugs. Methamphetamine is one of the most dangerous drugs out there. I've seen more prisoners go psychotic on methamphetamine than any other drug.
It opens up doorways.
It opens you up and says, come on in.
So there's definitely some sort of spiritual battle going on there in the world. I think a lot of people, though, on a positive note, a lot of people are aware of the spiritual battle that's going on. I think these entities, they're scared. I think they're getting cornered, because I think a lot of people despite all the negativity and violence going on in the world, a lot of other people are realizing that that's not the correct way. So I do think we're at a crossroads. I'm not sure how long this crossroads is going to go on for, but something's coming to a head. Just not sure
Yes.
when it's exactly going to finally resolve or resettle itself.
Yeah, people are waking up.
Yes, I feel that people are waking up and these entities are getting desperate. This is why
Yes.
they are reacting like they do.
It's kind of like their battle of the bulge. It's their last final ditch effort to kind of maintain control.
Yep, agreed.
So, Georgia, if I may, I did write a book that kind of got me to this point. It's called Revelations on Interstellar Highway 10. And it was kind of my search for truth, religious truth. And it's what kind of led me to Jerry eventually, too. It led me to Gnosticism and helped me to discover what these entities were that I had encountered. And the book is good for anyone kind of on a spiritual path. It's a manual. And I know there's lots of other books out there that discuss spirituality and provide useful information for those on their path. But this is something that I kind of came up with. And I do have a website. It's asteroxrising.com for those that are interested in looking into the book. And I'll send you a link on that. You can put it in your show notes.
Yes, please.
Okay, and Sherry Sweeney and I wrote this book, An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind. So it talks about how we discovered that these voices were entities and not hallucinations. It gives examples and kind of runs through the background of psychiatry. And fairly recently, a new energetic therapy has shown up on the scene that works wonders in getting rid of buried trauma in this, buried in your subconscious that's affecting you that you don't know about. I've got the link to a description and a explanation on my website at jerrymarzinski.com. It provides permanent results for trauma, and it cleans it out, and it won't come back.
I recommend it strongly. I did the sessions with you, Jerry, with the MACE energy method, and it really works as it says. It helps you get rid of the cause. It's not just alleviating symptoms.
Exactly right. That's why they call it causism. And it's got a spiritual component, it's got a scientific component, and they mesh together. So it does take your spirit into account, which makes it so much more effective. Without that component, it wouldn't work.
Yes, I recommend it warmly. It's a big help, and I see it as the energy psychotherapy of the future.
Yes, it's the upcoming thing.
I thank you a lot. It was an amazing story, and there are a lot of revelations. So I hope, listeners, you got the keys that were presented here, because we all, unfortunately, we all have to deal with these type of entities. It's none of us who is not coming into encounter with them. You get the keys, you got the keys. It is love, it is the spiritual component, it is raising your level of vibration, it's having the spirituality connection in your daily life, and realizing that these negative thoughts is not you. There are entities trying to influence you, trying to control you, to manipulate you, to simply make you their food. So say no, say no. Thank you very much, and I'm very grateful that you agreed to be in this interview. I really hope that this will help a lot of people, because if they wake up to the realization these negative thoughts are not their thoughts, are just ideas put into their consciousness, but these negative entities in order to manipulate and simply drain their energy, then you can fight them.
Thank you very much for the invite.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
very
having
much.
us.